Aeneg by Kaylee. Chapter 26. The short ride up a single level was enough for Chi to begin to worry. Damien was on the verge of a panic attack, and Doc looked like she was in the middle of the most intense coffee high he'd ever seen. His dad had become quite adept at eating the grounds from the bottles in order to stay awake when they had been outside. The results had scared him at first, the withdrawal even more so. The 9-year-old wondered if this was about Cale being bitten. Even though he was young, he wasn't stupid. He'd heard the other scouts talking about how the scarred one was bandaged up in strange places. He was proven right when they arrived on level 2, and Doc sprinted in. Cale lay across a scraggly couch that looked older than the outbreak, while Ndi and Silas hovered at a distance. His sister prattled on about how she'd found him and asked if he was going to be all right. Doc ignored her as she tried to inspect the man. The scream he let out when her hand touched his skin was bone-chilling. The nymph Ndi hadn't been able to stop talking about practically jumped over her to get between the doctor and the scout. It hissed at her, and Damien was instantly at her side, pushing her behind him as he faced off with the monster. He looked angry, and the gun in his hand hummed threateningly. "Don't touch her," he spat, but the monster didn't back down. It didn't attack either. Chi knew that it wouldn't. Ndi had said so. That still didn't make it any less scary. "Then don't touch him," it growled back warningly. Cale whined, long and high, before the sound choked off suddenly, and he slumped down into the couch. The monster looked torn between letting Doc help and keeping her away so she wouldn't hurt him again. When the small spasms began to twitch all over his body, the monster decided to step aside. Without the monster blocking him from view, Cale looked asleep, having a nightmare, but still asleep. Doc was very careful not to touch as she looked him over. Her silence was unnerving until a huff left her shoulders drooping. "I can't work with you all staring at me." The adults took a step back, but the monster only turned his eyes on the sleeping man. "This is going to sound strange," she said slowly. "But it looks like he's fighting the transformation." "Trust Cale to be stubborn," Damien chuckled, but the sound wasn't right, like he didn't believe his own joke. "Max?" Doc tried softly, pulling the monster's attention away from the still twitching man. "I need to examine him. Will you let me?" "But you hurt him," it whined. It was pathetic, in a way. The thing that had terrorized Chi's family since before he could remember, given him nightmares so bad he'd wet himself, and the thing that had killed his sister, was cowering like a kicked dog beside the man his other sister had fought with their parents over. Chi should have felt something other than shame as he watched the doctor smile sweetly at the monster. "It wasn't intentional, but I need to look him over." Her smile tightened when Cale let out a ragged breath, and he shook hard before he fell silent again. "Max," Ndi called softly, and she wondered how his sister could be so calm, talking with the monster. "Doc will help. It's better she does this now while he's out." The monster looked hopelessly lost, and Chi was finally beginning to understand why his sister had got so defensive about him at breakfast. He would have to remind Ndi that it wasn't a pet. Max finally moved off the couch so Doc could get close enough to place her hand on Cale's forehead. She mumbled worriedly while she quickly poked and prodded, stripped away the gauze to reveal teeth marks with thick yellow and green gunk oozing foam bubbles over the disgustingly pale skin. She couldn't watch. Instead, he took the time to scan the room. It was nice enough, beginning to smell thanks to the mangled corpse lying on the table not more than a meter or so from him. Ndi was crazy to want to work here. It was gross. He sent a raised eyebrow her way, but her attention was on other things. He wondered if Mom and Dad knew what she was up to down here. A tapping brought Chi back, only to gulp as Doc pushed the biggest needle he'd ever seen into Kale's arm. The scout cried out weakly in his sleep. Ndi abandoned Max to help hold Kale still, only for him to grab a hold of her arm tightly. "He's so warm," she murmured worriedly. "That can't be healthy." "It's not, but he's not in danger yet," Doc assured her. She didn't think she sounded all that convincing. She bundled up her syringe and headed for the elevator. "I need to do some tests. Ndi, if his temperature gets any higher, you call me." "I should limit access to the lower levels," Damien spoke up before Ndi could. She looked like she'd wanted to protest. "Until we're certain he's not going to turn." The sigh he let slip was similar to how Dad had sounded that one time he didn't sleep for a whole 3 days. "I should let everyone know." Chi jumped when Silas coughed to get the first attention. The kid hadn't even noticed the blonde standing in the corner, just watching everyone. "After this morning, don't you think that would be a bad idea?" "You're right," Damien nodded slowly. "Oh." He was looking for someone to give him an excuse to lie to the civilians. Chi frowned. Maybe he should ask Silas to train him instead. He had seemed so cool when they were being rescued, but she didn't like the way the commander was acting now. "I'll stand watch," the blonde scout offered, leaning against the table, which held the slowly rotting whatever that thing was. Maish was there. He saw what happened, and I'm sure he'll alternate with me. Silas seemed to be trying to convince Damien of something, but the man cocked his head at him, still looking unsure. Why adults couldn't simply say what they meant was beyond Chi. His sister had started doing that the day she turned 16. He hadn't liked it one bit. "If he changes, we'll shoot him." "And I'll bite you," the monster retorted, but it didn't sound all that convincing. His eyes were glued to the unconscious individual who had still not let go of Ndi's arm. It was strange to see a monster look worried. The two scouts seemed to come to some form of silent agreement, because Damien sagged in on himself as he relented. "All right," he mumbled. "If he turns, you do whatever you have to, Silas. Max, if you get in the way, Silas has my permission to put a bullet through your brain." Max crawled closer to the couch and lay his head on the cushion beside Kale's leg. He whined softly until Ndi touched his shoulder with her free hand. "That'll only happen if he turns," she soothed gently. "He's a fighter." Chi was surprised that she wasn't lying. "I'll look after him," the monster declared. Not once did he take his eyes off the sick scout. "That way, we'll both be out of your hair." Chi didn't think it really had a choice. "Ndi can stay with you," Damien agreed. "I'm going to phone Maish. I'll brief him and send him down after lunch." Ndi glared at the man, but he either didn't notice or didn't care. "Keep Max calm," the soldier ordered her curtly. "Kale hasn't turned yet, and in my experience that means he's going to die. Max is still our #1 security concern. So keep him here and occupied." "You know I can hear you, right?" the monster grumbled, finally tearing his eyes away from Kale, only for the scarred man to jolt hard. His teeth clenched as a sob welled up from his chest. "You want our help? You play by our rules, Max." The monster instantly backed down. Okay, so that was why he was all right. He was a total wimp. "I don't like it, but we'll keep this on a strictly need-to-know basis," Damien continued. She didn't believe him. Nobody says anything about what has happened here. Chi found himself nodding along with Silas and his sister before Damien headed for the elevator. "Chi, you're with me." The kid jogged after the man and waited patiently for Damien to say something. He didn't, but that was all right. If he'd tried to give him a speech about keeping everything on the down low, Chi would have had to tell him about the farmers that had been watching the whole thing from the floor above.